Hello! I would be very pleased if you would like the video. Subscribe so you don't miss new videos every day that will help you relax. I'm also curious where you are listening to me from and what time it is now. Write it in the comments. Enjoy watching. The sun rose over the dusty town of Redstone, spilling its golden light across the wooden storefronts and dirt-packed streets. Sheriff James Caldwell stirred from his bed in the small office above the jailhouse. The creaking of floorboards beneath his boots accompanied each step as he made his way to the front window, squinting against the bright glare. Redstone was a quiet town in the early hours, but James knew the peace would be temporary. Outlaws and trouble often found their way here, and it was his duty to meet them head-on. After a quick breakfast of coffee and stale bread, he checked his revolver and holster, ensuring the weapon was clean and loaded. His leather badge, polished until it gleamed, caught the light and reminded him of the responsibility he carried. Being a sheriff on the Wild West frontier was not about heroism or glory. It was about keeping order in a place where law often came at the point of a gun, and the line between justice and revenge blurred easily. By mid-morning, the streets began to stir. Townsfolk emerged from their homes, bringing life to Redstone's dusty avenues. Children chased each other in the dirt, their laughter echoing off the wooden walls, while merchants set up tables, arranging produce, bolts of cloth, and the occasional trinket for passing travelers. James made his rounds, tipping his hat to familiar faces, exchanging brief words, and listening closely to the rumors and whispers that drifted through the town. A sheriff's eyes and ears had to be everywhere, always alert. The first incident of the day came unexpectedly. A young man, barely older than a teenager, ran down the street, shouting for help. "Thieves! They've taken Old Man Harris' horses." James's boots pounded against the boardwalk as he sprinted toward the commotion. Old Man Harris, a wiry figure with a weathered face, pointed toward the hills. "They're fast, Sheriff, too fast." James didn't hesitate. He swung onto his horse, adjusted his hat, and galloped toward the rising dust clouds in the distance, his mind calculating every possibility. Catching up with horse thieves was never easy, especially on the rough terrain surrounding Redstone. James pushed his steed to its limits, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. The sound of pounding hooves and the sharp whinny of frightened horses filled the air. Finally, he spotted them. Two men, carrying stolen saddlebags, urging a pair of stolen horses along a narrow trail. Drawing his revolver, James approached cautiously, knowing that a direct confrontation could be deadly. But the law had to be upheld, and hesitation could mean a lifetime of regret. "Stop right there," he shouted, his voice carrying over the wind. The thieves turned, panic in their eyes, and attempted to flee across the rocky outcrop. James fired a warning shot into the air, the crack of the gun echoing off the cliffs. One man faltered, his horse skidding on loose stones, while the other continued to flee. James spurred his horse forward, tackling the first thief to the ground. The struggle was brief but tense, ending with the man cuffed and sitting defeated on a boulder. The second thief managed to escape, disappearing into the hills. James sighed, knowing he would have to track him later, but for now, Old Man Harris' horses were safe. He helped the first man onto his feet and secured the stolen property before returning to town. Redstone's residents had gathered, whispering and watching. Children peeked from behind crates, wide-eyed at the drama unfolding in front of them. James gave a small nod of reassurance, maintaining his stern, composed demeanor. Back at the sheriff's office, James completed the paperwork for the arrest, recording every detail meticulously. It was not just about punishing wrongdoers. It was about creating a record that could withstand the scrutiny of the law, ensuring that justice was served fairly. The hours ticked by, and soon the sun reached its zenith, casting harsh shadows across the streets. Lunch was a simple affair, a piece of salted meat and bread, eaten quickly while keeping an eye on the town. In the afternoon, James dealt with a series of smaller disturbances, a dispute over a poker game, a cow wandering into the town square, and a complaint about a barking dog that had bitten a child. Each situation required a different approach, some demanding firmness, others patience, but all needing the steady hand of authority. Redstone relied on him, not just for protection, but for guidance and fairness. A sheriff's day was a delicate balance of enforcement and diplomacy. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting a warm orange hue over Redstone, James prepared for the evening patrol. Shadows lengthened, hiding potential threats, and the temperature dropped quickly in the open plains. The sheriff walked the main street, lantern in hand, greeting the townsfolk and ensuring that everything remained in order. Every window was checked, every alley observed. In the Wild West, danger often lurked in the shadows, and vigilance was the key to survival. Nightfall brought a different kind of tension. The saloon was lively, filled with laughter, music, and the occasional heated argument. James kept a watchful eye, stepping in only when matters escalated beyond friendly banter. Outside, the wind whistled through the empty streets, carrying the scent of smoke and dust. The sheriff's horse waited patiently at the stable, ready for any call to action. Redstone might sleep, but the sheriff's duty never truly ended. His day would continue until the last threat was gone, and the town could rest safely. As dusk settled over Redstone, the streets grew quieter, and shadows stretched long across the wooden sidewalks. Sheriff James Caldwell walked methodically, lantern in hand, scanning every alley and doorway. He had learned over the years that the Wild West was full of surprises, and a moment's inattention could lead to chaos. Tonight, he needed to remain alert, even if the town seemed peaceful. The saloon buzzed with activity, a mixture of laughter, clinking glasses, and the occasional shout. James entered quietly, nodding to the bartender. He kept a watchful eye on the crowd, observing poker games and card sharks trying to cheat. His presence alone often diffused tension, though a raised voice or a sudden scuffle could quickly escalate. Tonight, it seemed calmer, but he knew that peace in Redstone was never guaranteed. Outside, a lone rider appeared on the horizon, dust trailing behind him. James's instincts sharpened instantly. Unknown travelers were always a potential risk, and he had to decide quickly whether this rider brought trouble or was simply passing through. Gripping his revolver, he stepped outside, signaling the man to halt. The rider reined in his horse, dust settling around them as they exchanged wary glances under the fading light. "Evening, Sheriff," the rider said cautiously. "Name's Cole, just passing through." James studied him carefully. Cole's eyes were alert, hands resting near his saddle. James nodded slowly. "Keep moving." Then, "Redstone's fine for the night, but any trouble and you won't get far." Cole tipped his hat and continued toward the horizon, disappearing into the twilight. James allowed himself a brief sigh of relief, knowing that small victories like this kept the town safe. As night deepened, the wind picked up, rustling through empty barrels and loose boards. James mounted his horse for the night patrol, riding slowly through the main street and into the outskirts. The moonlight cast silver shadows, making the familiar landscape seem unfamiliar and eerie. Every creek and hollow could hide danger. He made sure to check every shed and barn, ensuring livestock were secure and doors locked. A scream pierced the night from the eastern edge of town. James spurred his horse, racing toward the sound. A young woman, her dress torn and face streaked with tears, pointed tremblingly toward a small cabin. Inside, two men were attempting to steal supplies. James dismounted swiftly, revolver drawn. "Drop your hands," he commanded. Startled, the men froze, then fled into the darkness. James pursued them briefly but realized he could not catch them all. He returned to the cabin, comforting the frightened woman and securing her belongings. Back in town, James logged the incident in his journal, noting descriptions of the men and items stolen. It was tedious work, but documentation was critical. If the men were caught later, every detail mattered for prosecution. Afterward, he visited the jailhouse, checking on prisoners and ensuring all was in order. The night was still young, and there was no telling when another emergency might arise. A sheriff's duties never truly ended. Later, he stopped by the general store, finding the owner locking the doors and tallying the day's earnings. James exchanged a few words about the weather and local gossip, maintaining relationships that were as important as enforcing the law. Trust between the sheriff and townsfolk could prevent disputes from escalating into violence. A strong community meant fewer threats and more eyes watching over Redstone. As he continued his patrol, James noticed a flicker of light near the old mill. Curious and cautious, he approached quietly. Two men were attempting to set up a campfire near the water wheel, obviously trying to remain hidden. James stepped forward, his shadow stretching long under the moonlight. "This is Redstone. You're not welcome here," he said firmly. The men scattered into the night, leaving behind the faint smell of smoke and the remnants of their fire. Returning to the town square, James dismounted, tying his horse and checking the perimeter. The moon hung low, casting a serene glow over Redstone, yet James remained vigilant. Nighttime brought out the desperate and reckless, those who thrived when law was absent. He made a mental note to increase patrols near the hills and river tomorrow. Every sheriff knew that preparation prevented tragedies. Finally, after hours of tireless vigilance, James allowed himself a brief rest. He sat on the boardwalk, lantern flickering beside him, listening to the quiet hum of the night. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, and the wind carried the scent of pine and dust. Tomorrow would bring more work, more disputes, more challenges, but for now, Redstone slept safely. The sheriff's duty was never glamorous, but it was essential. Before retreating to the office above the jail, James checked one last thing: the town's gates. Secured and locked, they offered a small comfort in a world where danger was constant. As he climbed the stairs, weary yet alert, he reflected on the day's events. Every act, from catching horse thieves to preventing theft, mattered. Each decision shaped the safety and trust of Redstone. And tomorrow, the cycle would begin again. Morning light filtered through the dusty windows of the sheriff's office. James Caldwell rose quickly, aware that the day could bring anything from a minor dispute to a deadly confrontation. He had little time for breakfast, grabbing a piece of bread and coffee before saddling his horse. Redstone rarely remained calm for long, and he needed to be ready for whatever awaited him outside the office doors. The first call of the day came from the outskirts of town. A wagon had overturned near the creek, spilling barrels of flour and sacks of grain across the muddy bank. Farmers were struggling to recover their goods, and tempers flared as frustration grew. James approached calmly, assessing the situation. With a few well-chosen words, he organized the men, directing them to right the wagon and secure the spilled supplies. It was a small victory, but even mundane problems demanded leadership. Once the immediate crisis was handled, James returned to the main street. There, a new problem awaited. A stranger had arrived in town, claiming to be a trader. His wagon was heavy with goods, but townsfolk whispered that he might be hiding stolen property. James approached with caution, questioning the man politely but firmly. The trader produced receipts and permits, yet James's instincts remained wary. He made a note to keep an eye on him, knowing that appearances could be deceiving in the Wild West. By mid-morning, a more serious issue emerged. Reports arrived of a gang riding toward Redstone from the north. Known for their ruthless raids, these men had terrorized neighboring towns, leaving burned barns and frightened families in their wake. James didn't panic. Instead, he prepared strategically. He gathered a few trustworthy deputies and positioned them at key points around town. Everyone had a role, from watching the streets to securing the horses and supplies. As the gang approached, Redstone held its breath. Dust clouds rose in the distance, the sound of hooves carrying over the plains. James met them at the edge of town, revolver drawn, and waited. The gang slowed, sizing up the sheriff's presence. Negotiation was often the first tactic, but these men were unpredictable. James's voice carried across the wind. Redstone is under law. Turn back or face consequences. The leader sneered, weighing the risk, but James's steady stance gave him pause. A tense standoff ensued, the air thick with anticipation. Suddenly, one of the gang members dismounted. Approaching cautiously, he spoke of a misunderstanding, claiming they meant no harm. James listened but remained cautious, signaling his deputies to stay alert. Trust could not be given lightly. After a few careful exchanges, the gang decided to move on, sparing Redstone from immediate danger. The sheriff's composure and preparation had prevented a violent confrontation. With the immediate threat gone, James returned to the town, but his day was far from over. Farmers needed assistance, disputes over property persisted, and a missing child had been reported near the river. The sheriff mounted his horse again, following tracks in the mud toward the water. Hours passed as he searched, calling the child's name and interrogating locals for clues. Finally, he spotted a small figure hiding among the reeds, frightened but unharmed. He coaxed the child back to safety, earning grateful thanks from the parents. The afternoon brought more challenges. A fire broke out in a small stable on the town's edge. Horses neighed in panic as flames spread quickly. James organized townsfolk to form a bucket line, working tirelessly to douse the fire. His calm authority and quick thinking saved most of the animals, though a few were lost. Smoke filled the air, stinging eyes and throats, but James refused to relent until the flames were under control. It was another reminder that danger in Redstone could take many forms, from crime to accidents. By evening, the sheriff allowed himself a brief respite. He sat on the boardwalk, boots dusty and hands worn, reflecting on the day's events. Each moment had demanded vigilance, from preventing thefts to handling natural dangers. Redstone depended on him, not just for enforcement, but for leadership and reassurance. He knew that maintaining trust was as vital as maintaining law. Nightfall brought a final test. A group of rowdy cowhands, celebrating a cattle drive, caused disturbances near the saloon. Glasses shattered, chairs tipped, and tempers flared. James stepped in, voice firm but controlled, separating the troublemakers and restoring order. One young man challenged him, hand hovering near a pistol. Calmly, James disarmed him with precision, demonstrating authority without unnecessary violence. The crowd quieted, and respect was maintained. After ensuring the town was secure, James made his rounds one last time. Streets were quiet, doors locked, and lanterns casting soft light along the wooden sidewalks. He checked on deputies, ensured prisoners were safe, and confirmed that Redstone's gates remained secure. Every detail mattered, as even minor oversights could lead to chaos. The sheriff's work was unending, a constant balance of prevention, enforcement, and vigilance. Finally, James returned to his office above the jailhouse. He recorded the day's events meticulously, noting incidents, observations, and lessons learned. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, Redstone rested safely under his watch. Sitting by the window, he gazed at the moonlit town, weary yet resolute. The life of a sheriff was demanding, often lonely, but essential for the survival of a frontier town like Redstone. Night fell heavily over Redstone, the sky deep indigo and speckled with stars. Sheriff James Caldwell walked slowly through the silent streets, lantern in hand. Each creak of a wooden board or whisper of wind drew his attention. The town slept, yet danger never truly rested. James had learned that the Wild West often tested a sheriff long after the sun disappeared. A sudden noise from the northern alley caught his ear. Shuffling steps, faint but deliberate, hinted at intruders. James moved quietly, hand on his revolver. He rounded the corner to find two men attempting to break into the general store. "Freeze!" he commanded, surprised. The men froze, then bolted. James pursued briefly, but the shadows swallowed them, leaving only the faint echo of their flight. Returning to the store, James inspected the locks, ensuring no entry point remained vulnerable. The owner had left a lantern burning, and James adjusted it to illuminate the doorway better. Every precaution mattered. Even minor oversights could invite trouble. He made a mental note to reinforce doors and discuss security with the townsfolk tomorrow. The safety of Redstone depended on vigilance, day and night. As he continued his patrol, James noticed a horse tied loosely near the saloon. Its owner was nowhere in sight. The animal nickered softly, restless in the cool night air. James approached, loosening the rope and securing the horse properly. Small acts of care like this were part of his duty, a reminder that law enforcement also involved compassion and attention to detail. The town's well-being included both people and animals. Midnight brought a different challenge. A fire ignited near the outskirts, smoke curling into the night sky. Horses whinnied in panic, and nearby buildings trembled in the heat. James raced toward the blaze, rallying townsfolk to form a bucket brigade. Flames crackled, and sparks danced dangerously close to dry wood. Sweat and soot covered him, but determination drove every movement. Hours passed until the fire was controlled, leaving only scorched earth and relieved citizens. Exhausted but vigilant, James checked on prisoners one last time. Their murmurs and occasional coughs filled the small jailhouse. He ensured they were fed and secured, understanding that neglecting this duty could invite chaos. Even those who had broken the law depended on his fairness and attention. Maintaining order required more than bravery. It required discipline and consistency, qualities James upheld every day. By early morning, the town returned to quietude. James mounted his horse for a final patrol before the dawn. The wind was cool, and the streets were empty. He rode slowly, observing every corner, every shadow, confirming that Redstone was safe, for now. A sheriff's work was cyclical, relentless, and unforgiving, yet it was also deeply rewarding. Protecting a town like this required courage, foresight, and unwavering commitment. At last, James returned to the office above the jailhouse. He sat at his desk, lantern casting a soft glow over records and maps. He reflected on the day, the horse thieves, the fire, the standoff with the gang, the missing child, and the nightly disturbances. Each event tested his skills and resolve, shaping him as both a man and a leader. His life was difficult, yet the gratitude of Redstone's citizens made every trial worthwhile. He wrote detailed notes, ensuring that tomorrow would start with clarity and preparedness. Every incident was logged, every lesson remembered. The Wild West was unpredictable, and tomorrow could bring new threats, old adversaries, or unforeseen challenges. But James was ready, his experience and steady hand equipping him for whatever lay ahead. The town's trust rested on his vigilance, and he would not falter. Finally, he climbed the stairs to his small room above the jail, the first rays of dawn beginning to lighten the horizon. Exhaustion weighed heavily, yet a sense of accomplishment filled him. Redstone was safe, its people asleep, its streets calm. Tomorrow would bring more work, more responsibility, and more dangers. But for now, the sheriff allowed himself a rare moment of peace. Another day in the life of a Wild West lawman had ended. Dawn broke over Redstone with a soft pink glow, painting the dusty streets in warm light. Sheriff James Caldwell mounted his horse, feeling the cool morning air on his face. Today promised new challenges. Nights were restless, and even in the calm of early morning, he sensed the town's fragile peace could be disrupted at any moment. The first task of the day was a routine inspection of the stables. Horses nickered, hooves clattered on wooden floors, and the smell of hay filled the air. James checked each animal carefully, ensuring they were healthy and accounted for. He knew that a missing horse could trigger chaos, for both farmers and travelers alike, and every detail mattered. By mid-morning, a stranger arrived, riding a heavily laden wagon. His clothes were worn, face tanned by the sun, and eyes sharp with experience. James greeted him cautiously, asking his business in Redstone. The man claimed to be a trader, but James noticed subtle inconsistencies in his story. Instinct told him to keep a close watch, as appearances in the Wild West could be dangerously deceptive. Meanwhile, the town's children ran along the boardwalks, playing tag and laughing, their carefree joy a stark contrast to the adult concerns surrounding them. James watched them briefly, allowing himself a small smile. Protecting this innocence was part of his responsibility. He made a mental note to speak with a local teacher about starting a safety program. If children understood rules and dangers, fewer accidents might occur. Late morning brought a tense situation at the saloon. Two men argued over a game of poker, voices rising and fists clenching. James stepped in with calm authority, separating the men and diffusing the tension. One accused the other of cheating, while the other insisted it was a misunderstanding. James listened carefully, asking questions and weighing both sides. In Redstone, even a small dispute could escalate into a deadly fight if handled poorly. As the argument resolved, news arrived of a missing shipment of goods from a neighboring town. Bandits were suspected, and James immediately gathered a few deputies to investigate. The trail led into the hills north of Redstone, where dust trails and broken branches marked the passage of the thieves. James spurred his horse forward, adrenaline sharpening his senses. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the cry of a bird, was a clue. Tracking the bandits required patience and skill. James moved silently through the terrain, scanning the hills for movement. Hours passed, and he observed their camp from a ridge, noting positions, numbers, and the location of stolen crates. Planning the approach carefully, he ensured the safety of both his deputies and any innocent bystanders. The Wild West was unforgiving, and one mistake could cost lives. By afternoon, James confronted the bandits. A tense standoff unfolded, dust swirling around boots and horses. The gang leader sneered, daring James to make a move. With a firm voice, he demanded the return of stolen goods and surrender of the men. A shot rang out, not at James, but in the air as a warning. The bandits hesitated, unsure of the sheriff's next move. James's calm demeanor and steady aim convinced them that resistance was futile. With careful negotiation, the stolen goods were recovered, and the bandits were brought back to Redstone under watchful eyes. Townsfolk gathered to witness the return, relief and admiration evident on their faces. The sheriff's reputation as a fair but unyielding lawman grew stronger. Even in the harsh and unpredictable frontier, people respected order when it was applied consistently. Returning to town, James stopped by the general store. The trader from earlier was present, carefully unloading wares. James observed him quietly, noting interactions with townsfolk. Trust could not be given lightly, but a fair and honest trade benefited the community. Small judgments like these maintained Redstone's stability and prevented future conflicts before they could arise. As evening approached, James walked through the town, lantern in hand, checking for any lingering issues. Doors were locked, streets emptying, and the wind carried a soft rustle through the wooden buildings. Even a seemingly quiet town required vigilance. James made his rounds deliberately, listening for subtle sounds, ensuring nothing escaped his notice. Every step reinforced the town's safety and his authority. By nightfall, the sheriff returned to the office above the jailhouse. He recorded the day's events meticulously: the stable inspections, the poker dispute, the tracking of bandits, and the observations of the trader. Every entry mattered, forming a record that could guide future actions and serve as proof of lawful conduct. James reflected briefly, knowing tomorrow would bring new challenges, as it always did. Before resting, James stepped onto the boardwalk outside his office. The town slept, bathed in moonlight. Dust settled in soft waves, and distant hills loomed silently. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe deeply, appreciating the calm after a day of vigilance. Yet he remained aware that this peace was temporary, and that his work as Redstone's sheriff was never truly complete. The morning air was sharp as Sheriff James Caldwell saddled his horse. Rumors had reached him overnight. A notorious outlaw, Garrett, Red Hand, Malone, was moving toward Redstone. Known for daring robberies and cold-blooded killings, Malone was a threat the town could not ignore. James's eyes narrowed as he adjusted his hat. Today would demand more than vigilance. It would demand courage. James rode to the edge of town, briefing his deputies on the situation. "We know his methods," he said quietly. "Stick together, watch every alley, and don't take unnecessary risks. Redstone is our home. We defend it." Each deputy nodded, tension etched in their faces. They had trained for this, but even the best men could falter against someone like Malone. By late morning, signs of Malone's gang appeared. Broken fences, hoof prints, and discarded supplies marked their path. James led his deputies along the trail, moving cautiously through the rough terrain. Every noise, the snap of a branch, the call of a bird, the distant clang of metal, was scrutinized. The Wild West had taught him that overconfidence was fatal. He signaled his men to halt, spotting movement in the scrub ahead. Malone emerged from the brush with a grin that never reached his eyes. Well, he sneered, Redstone's lawman, finally showing himself. James kept his revolver at his side, calm but ready. Negotiation was possible, but only if Malone valued his life. "This ends here, Malone. Leave now, or face justice," James warned. The outlaw laughed, spinning his pistol with casual arrogance. The tension was palpable. Dust swirled around boots, and the horses shifted nervously beneath their riders. Malone's gang circled, eyes glinting with mischief and menace. James studied the terrain, noting rocks for cover and paths for retreat if necessary. He understood that strategy could outweigh numbers. One wrong move, and the town he protected could become a battlefield. Suddenly, a shot rang out from the gang's left flank. James dove behind a rock, his deputies scattering into cover. Bullets ricocheted against wood and stone. Calmly, James returned fire, careful to aim only when he had a clear shot. The standoff stretched for tense minutes, each side probing the other, testing courage and accuracy. The sun glinted off metal and sweat alike. Seeing an opening, James ordered a flanking maneuver. Two deputies moved through a narrow canyon while he approached Malone directly. The outlaw, sensing a direct threat, drew his revolver with lightning speed. Time seemed to stretch. James's heart pounded, yet his hand was steady. In a flash, the two guns discharged almost simultaneously. Malone's pistol fell to the ground, and James's aim was true. Silence followed the shots. Malone's gang, shocked, hesitated before surrendering. James rounded up the men and secured the outlaw. Exhaustion mixed with relief. The threat was neutralized, and Redstone remained safe. The townsfolk who had watched from a distance cheered, their trust in the sheriff reinforced. He knew the danger wasn't gone forever, but today justice had prevailed. Returning to town, James ensured the prisoners were secured in the jailhouse. Each man received fair treatment under the law, regardless of past crimes. James's sense of duty extended beyond capturing outlaws. It was about maintaining order and ensuring Redstone remained a place where law and fairness prevailed. Later, he walked the streets, checking on citizens and comforting those affected by earlier skirmishes. Children peeked from behind crates, wide-eyed at the lawman who had faced Malone. James gave a nod, acknowledging their curiosity and fear. For Redstone, he was more than a sheriff. He was a symbol of safety and resilience. As night approached, James recorded every detail in his journal. The movements of Malone's gang, the shots fired, and the decisions made under pressure. Documentation was critical. If any legal action required review, these notes ensured that justice would stand on firm ground. Every bullet, every maneuver, and every word mattered in the court of law. Finally, James returned to the office above the jailhouse. His body ached from the day's exertions, yet his mind remained alert. He glanced at the moonlit town below, streets quiet once more, and allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. Redstone was safe tonight, and its people could sleep without fear. The Wild West was unforgiving, but courage, vigilance, and wisdom had prevailed once again. The morning sun rose over Redstone, casting long shadows across the wooden sidewalks. Sheriff James Caldwell reviewed the aftermath of the previous day's confrontation with Malone's gang. Reports from deputies indicated minor property damage and shaken townsfolk, but no serious injuries. James knew the work was far from over. The Wild West offered no permanent peace. He began by inspecting the jailhouse, ensuring the captured outlaws were securely locked and accounted for. Each man's behavior was noted, and James ensured their basic needs were met. Justice demanded fairness, and the sheriff upheld the law even with hardened criminals. Maintaining order required discipline, patience, and an unshakable sense of duty. News arrived from a neighboring settlement. A series of robberies had been reported along the trade route connecting Redstone to the nearby town of Clearwater. James quickly gathered deputies and strategized a plan. The town depended on these supply lines, and unchecked criminal activity threatened both trade and safety. He knew he had to act swiftly, combining intelligence with tactical caution. The sheriff led his men along the dusty trail, scanning the hills and plains for signs of the outlaws. Tracks indicated multiple assailants, and James carefully assessed the terrain, noting potential ambush points. Every movement was deliberate, every sound scrutinized. In the frontier, a single misstep could lead to disaster. Discipline and awareness were as important as courage. Mid-morning, they discovered a hidden camp near a rocky outcrop. Barrels and crates marked the stolen goods, and the fire still smoldered from the night before. James approached cautiously, ensuring the safety of his men. He signaled deputies to surround the camp quietly, minimizing risk and maximizing leverage. A surprise encounter required strategy, not brute force. The outlaws emerged, surprised by the coordinated response. Guns were drawn, but James's calm and precise commands prevented immediate violence. He negotiated carefully, demanding the surrender of the stolen goods and the gang's compliance. Tension hung in the air, the desert heat amplifying every sound. Sweat trickled down his brow, but his focus never wavered. After several tense minutes, the outlaws relented, handing over the stolen property. James secured the goods and prepared to escort the men back to Redstone. Townsfolk would sleep easier knowing that trade routes were safe once again. The sheriff's diligence reinforced the fragile trust between communities, ensuring that law and order prevailed even in remote areas. On the way back, James discussed strategy with his deputies, emphasizing the importance of vigilance along the roads and near isolated homesteads. He reminded them that a single lapse could allow bandits to regroup. Leadership required both foresight and attention to detail. The safety of Redstone depended on the coordination of every responsible adult. By afternoon, the town began to bustle again. Merchants restocked their stalls, children played, and farmers tended livestock. James patrolled the streets, greeting residents and listening for rumors. Knowledge of community sentiment was as valuable as knowledge of criminal patterns. A sheriff had to understand people, their fears, hopes, and grievances to maintain peace effectively. Later, he visited Clearwater briefly to coordinate with their lawman. Sharing intelligence about bandit movements and suspicious individuals strengthened regional security. Collaboration between settlements was essential in a lawless land. James emphasized regular patrols, consistent communication, and immediate reporting of unusual activity to prevent future raids. Returning to Redstone, James addressed minor disputes, a cattle argument between neighbors, a disagreement over land boundaries, and a complaint about excessive noise from a passing wagon. Each incident required diplomacy, fairness, and firmness. The sheriff's ability to mediate prevented small conflicts from escalating into dangerous confrontations. Evening approached, bringing long shadows and cooler air. James conducted his final patrol, lantern in hand, moving slowly through the streets and checking that all gates were secure. The town was calm, yet he knew vigilance remained necessary. Criminals, natural hazards, and human error could all disrupt peace if underestimated. Finally, he returned to the office above the jailhouse. Exhausted but alert, James recorded the day's events in meticulous detail: the capture of the outlaws, the recovered goods, and interactions with neighboring lawmen. Every note served as a guide for future action and a record of lawful conduct. The Wild West demanded accountability, precision, and an unwavering commitment to justice. As night fell, James gazed out over the town from his window. Dust settled in soft waves, and distant hills stood silhouetted against the moonlit sky. The town slept safely under his watch. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, Redstone rested. The sheriff allowed himself a brief moment of quiet reflection before preparing for the inevitable cycle of danger, duty, and vigilance that defined his life. The sun rose softly over Redstone, painting the dusty streets in pale gold. Sheriff James Caldwell sat on the boardwalk, sipping coffee, lost in thought. The past days had been taxing, both physically and mentally. Law enforcement on the frontier was never just a matter of courage. It demanded endurance, patience, and the ability to bear the weight of responsibility. James reflected on the faces of townsfolk he had helped: the child found near the river, the shaken merchant whose goods were recovered, and the farmers whose livestock were saved. Every life mattered. The weight of their trust rested heavily on his shoulders, reminding him that the sheriff's role was as much about care as enforcement. A gentle breeze carried the faint scent of baked bread from the general store. James watched children playing nearby, their laughter echoing against the wooden buildings. Moments like these were rare, fleeting glimpses of innocence in a harsh world. Protecting that innocence was one of the quiet joys of his duty, yet it also reminded him of the stakes. One misstep could shatter the town's fragile peace. By mid-morning, James met with Mrs. Harper, the widow who ran the local inn. She expressed concerns about increased travelers and the potential for troublemakers slipping into town unnoticed. James listened attentively, offering reassurance and practical advice. His empathy and attentiveness strengthened the town's trust. Leadership, he knew, required both firmness and understanding. The sheriff's journal awaited attention. Writing down events, reflections, and observations helped James process the challenges he faced daily. He noted not only incidents but also his own reactions, moments of doubt, exhaustion, and fear. This introspection was vital. Even the strongest lawmen needed to understand themselves to lead others effectively. Later, James visited the schoolhouse. Children were learning to read and write, their curiosity boundless. He spoke briefly, answering questions about his duties and the importance of fairness, courage, and vigilance. Sharing these lessons instilled respect for law and order at a young age, planting seeds that might one day grow into capable and responsible citizens. Afternoon brought a minor dispute between neighbors over property lines. While seemingly trivial, such conflicts could escalate quickly. James mediated calmly, listening to both sides and proposing a fair resolution. His ability to balance justice with diplomacy prevented potential violence, maintaining harmony within the community he had sworn to protect. Evening descended, and James found himself at the stable, checking horses before the night patrol. One of his deputies, young and inexperienced, expressed anxiety about facing bandits in the dark. James placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," he said quietly. "It's acting despite it. Trust your instincts, and trust each other." His words grounded the deputy, reinforcing both confidence and cohesion. Nightfall brought reflection. James walked through the empty streets, lantern swinging softly, listening to the gentle rustle of wind through the town. Each corner, alley, and doorway reminded him of the responsibilities he bore. Protecting Redstone was not just about catching criminals. It was about ensuring safety, trust, and hope for every inhabitant. Returning to his office above the jailhouse, James paused to gaze at the sleeping town below. The moonlight cast silver patterns across rooftops and dusty roads. Despite exhaustion, he felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. The sheriff's life was demanding and sometimes lonely, but it was also deeply meaningful. Each decision, each act of care or courage, shaped the town's safety and character. Before retiring, James documented the day's events in his journal. He included both practical notes and reflections on the emotional weight of leadership. Recording these thoughts allowed him to process challenges, reinforce lessons learned, and prepare mentally for tomorrow's trials. Vigilance, courage, and empathy would again be required at dawn. Finally, he climbed the narrow stairs to his room above the jail, the first stars twinkling in the sky. Exhaustion and relief mingled as he lay on his cot. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new conflicts, and new responsibilities. Yet James felt ready. In the quiet moments, he reminded himself that every choice mattered, not only for justice but for the lives, hopes, and dreams of the people who depended on him. Redstone woke to a tense dawn. Rumors spread quickly. A large gang, larger and more ruthless than Malone's, was approaching from the west. Sheriff James Caldwell rose immediately, gathering his deputies and preparing the town for what could be the most dangerous confrontation yet. Today, the Wild West would test every ounce of courage and skill. James began by fortifying key locations: the jail, general store, saloon, and town hall. Barricades were set, windows reinforced, and horses secured. Townsfolk worked alongside him, stacking crates and strengthening doors. Fear mixed with determination. The sheriff's leadership inspired unity. The community knew that their survival depended on his vigilance. By mid-morning, dust clouds appeared on the horizon, signaling the gang's approach. Their hooves thundered, echoing across the plains. James mounted his horse, leading deputies and selected townsfolk to positions that offered tactical advantage. Every alley, corner, and rooftop was accounted for. Preparation would be the difference between safety and chaos. As the gang entered Redstone, shots rang out. Bullets tore through wooden boards, shattering windows. The sheriff directed his deputies with precision, moving calmly through the streets, returning fire only when necessary. Civilians were ushered into safe zones. The town became a chessboard of strategy, each movement calculated to protect lives and regain control. The gang split, attempting to flank the town from multiple directions. James anticipated their strategy, signaling deputies to counter. A tense firefight erupted near the general store. Dust, smoke, and the sharp crack of rifles filled the air. Heart pounding, James moved swiftly, taking cover behind barrels and returning fire, ensuring each shot counted. One gang member tried to set fire to the saloon. James reacted instantly, racing toward the flames, dousing the small fire with water and knocking the man down. Other deputies secured the perimeter, keeping the rest of the gang at bay. Coordination and timing were crucial. A single error could result in disaster for Redstone. Hours passed as the battle raged. Exhaustion weighed heavily, yet James pressed on, his focus unshakable. He moved through alleys, directed townsfolk to safety, and personally confronted gang members when necessary. Courage, quick thinking, and leadership allowed Redstone to withstand the onslaught. Every deputy's actions were guided by his calm command. Finally, as the sun began to set, the tide turned. The gang, battered and demoralized, attempted a final retreat. James and his deputies pursued, capturing stragglers and recovering stolen goods. The remaining criminals fled into the surrounding hills, leaving Redstone battered but unbroken. The sheriff's strategy and bravery had saved the town from devastation. Returning to the town square, James assessed the damage: broken windows, charred wood, and scattered debris. Injuries were minimal thanks to the careful evacuation of civilians. Townsfolk emerged cautiously, relief washing over their faces. James reassured them, emphasizing that rebuilding and vigilance would restore safety and confidence. Later, he checked on prisoners, documenting every arrest and noting gang member identities. Records were critical for justice and future security. James also met with residents, offering encouragement and guidance. Maintaining trust, respect, and community cohesion was as important as physical protection. Redstone had survived, but lessons had been learned that would shape its future. As night fell, James walked the quiet streets, lantern in hand, reflecting on the day's events. Every decision, every act of courage, and every careful strategy had been necessary to protect the town. Exhausted but resolute, he knew the Wild West would always demand vigilance, and Redstone's safety depended on his unwavering dedication. Finally, James returned to his office above the jailhouse. He recorded detailed notes about the battle, tactics used, lessons learned, and observations about the gang's methods. These records would serve as a guide for future encounters and a testament to the town's resilience. As he prepared to rest, he allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. Redstone had survived another day. Dawn broke over Redstone, the town slowly awakening after the chaos of yesterday. Sheriff James Caldwell stepped onto the boardwalk, surveying the streets. Dust lingered in the air, and the sun highlighted splintered wood and charred fences. Despite the damage, a sense of calm prevailed. Redstone had survived, and the sheriff's tireless efforts had ensured its safety. James began by checking on townsfolk. Families emerged cautiously, assessing their homes and belongings. Children peered curiously around corners, wide-eyed after the excitement. James offered reassurance, helping citizens repair small damages and offering guidance on safety measures. His presence was a reminder that Redstone's survival was not accidental, but the result of careful leadership. Next, he inspected the jailhouse. The captured gang members had been secured and were being processed according to the law. James reviewed records meticulously, noting every detail. Fair treatment, even for hardened criminals, was vital. Justice depended not only on courage but on integrity, and James upheld the law with both discipline and compassion. Throughout the morning, James coordinated cleanup and repair efforts. Townsfolk worked together to replace broken windows, repair fences, and clear debris. The sheriff moved among them, offering guidance, encouragement, and occasionally lending a hand. The sense of community strengthened under shared adversity, and Redstone's resilience became visible in the cooperative efforts of its citizens. By midday, merchants began restocking goods, and the saloon reopened. Life slowly returned to normal, though cautious vigilance remained. James patrolled the streets, observing interactions and listening for concerns. He spoke to residents, offering advice on safety, reinforcing rules, and reminding everyone of the importance of mutual respect and caution in a frontier town. In the afternoon, James visited the outskirts of town where a few fires had damaged barns and homes. He helped coordinate temporary shelters for livestock and guided repair teams to prevent further damage. These small but essential tasks ensured the town's recovery would be smooth, minimizing long-term disruption and preventing panic from lingering. Later, he met with neighboring sheriffs to discuss ongoing threats, sharing intelligence about gang movements, suspicious travelers, and potential raids strengthened regional security. Coordination among towns reinforced trust and allowed for rapid responses to emerging dangers. James emphasized that vigilance, communication, and cooperation were key to survival in the Wild West. As evening approached, James conducted one final patrol. Streets were quiet, lanterns casting soft light across wooden sidewalks. He checked on gates, homes, and businesses, ensuring the town remained secure. Each observation reinforced the importance of diligence and preparedness. Even moments of calm demanded attention, for the Wild West could turn on a single misstep. Finally, James returned to his office above the jailhouse. Exhausted but resolute, he recorded the day's events in his journal. He reflected on the lessons learned, the courage of deputies, the cooperation of townsfolk, the unpredictability of criminals, and the importance of calm leadership. Each challenge had tested him, but he emerged stronger and more aware of his responsibilities. Before retiring, James stood on the boardwalk one last time, gazing at Redstone under the moonlight. Dust settled softly over rooftops, and distant hills stood in serene silhouette. He knew tomorrow would bring new dangers, disputes, and challenges, but for now, the town rested safely. The sheriff allowed himself a rare moment of quiet pride. Redstone had survived another day, and its people could sleep peacefully. James climbed the narrow stairs to his small room above the jailhouse. The cot welcomed him with the comfort of exhaustion and satisfaction. He reflected on the day, acknowledging the sacrifices, the bravery, and the quiet acts of courage by both deputies and townsfolk. Life as a sheriff in the Wild West was never easy. Yet it was meaningful, vital, and deeply rewarding. As he drifted towards sleep, James knew the cycle would continue. Tomorrow would bring new conflicts, new responsibilities, and new opportunities to protect Redstone. But tonight, the town was safe, the people were secure, and justice had prevailed. The life of a sheriff was relentless, but in these moments of calm, James found the strength to face whatever the Wild West might demand next. The first light of dawn spread slowly across Redstone, painting the dusty streets with a soft, golden glow. Sheriff James Caldwell stood on the boardwalk, his hat low against the rising sun, eyes scanning the quiet town. Yesterday's chaos had left scars, both physical and emotional, yet the town endured. James could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on him, reminding him that each day in the Wild West demanded vigilance, courage, and wisdom. The streets were calm for now, but James knew this calm could vanish in an instant. He walked methodically through town, checking doors, shutters, and gates. Each detail mattered. Even a single unlocked door could invite disaster. Residents watched him pass, some with grateful smiles, others with wary eyes. The sheriff's presence was a constant reassurance, a symbol of law and order in a land where danger lurked behind every ridge and shadow. James's first stop was the general store, where the trader from several days ago had finished unloading his goods. The man greeted the sheriff with a respectful nod, and James inspected the merchandise, noting both quality and authenticity. Trust in the community depended on fair trade, and the sheriff's oversight ensured Redstone remained a place where honesty and justice prevailed. Small acts like these maintained order just as much as confronting outlaws. From the store, James moved toward the town's schoolhouse. Children were already gathered, their laughter ringing through the morning air. James paused at the doorway, observing quietly, teaching the next generation about respect, responsibility, and the consequences of their choices was as important as enforcing the law. He spoke briefly to the teacher, offering advice on safety measures and ways to instill discipline and civic awareness among the children. By mid-morning, James had received several requests for assistance. A minor dispute had erupted between two neighbors over the ownership of a cow. While seemingly trivial, such arguments could escalate into violence if unchecked. James mediated patiently, listening to both sides, weighing evidence, and offering a fair solution. The men nodded, grudgingly accepting his judgment, and life in Redstone continued without further incident. The sun climbed higher, and the heat of the day settled over the town. James visited the outskirts, checking the barns, stables, and farms affected by previous fires and raids. He coordinated repairs, directing townsfolk in rebuilding fences and securing livestock. Sweat trickled down his brow as he worked alongside them, demonstrating that leadership required both authority and personal effort. Action inspired confidence, and Redstone needed his guidance as much as his gun. Later, a group of travelers arrived, seeking shelter and assistance. James questioned them carefully, noting their appearance, speech, and behavior. In the Wild West, appearances were often deceptive, and the sheriff's instincts had been honed to detect subtle cues. After ensuring they posed no threat, he offered guidance and directions, maintaining the town's hospitality while safeguarding its security. Afternoon brought new challenges. Reports indicated suspicious figures in the hills, possibly scouting for weaknesses in Redstone's defenses. James and a small contingent of deputies mounted horses and rode toward the hills, moving cautiously through rocky terrain. Every step required attention. Loose stones, hidden gullies, and sudden movements could signal danger. Observation and patience were crucial in avoiding ambush or miscalculation. Upon reaching a vantage point, James surveyed the surrounding landscape. He spotted tracks leading toward a narrow canyon and deduced they belonged to a small band of outlaws, likely testing the town's readiness. Using careful strategy, he instructed deputies to circle and cut off potential escape routes. Communication was silent, using hand signals and subtle movements to coordinate. This was a game of anticipation and discipline, where mistakes could cost lives. Hours passed in tense vigilance. Eventually, the outlaws, realizing they were being observed and strategically outmaneuvered, retreated. James allowed them to escape rather than risking confrontation in dangerous terrain, prioritizing the safety of his men. Redstone remained secure, and the lesson of the day emphasized strategy over brute force, patience over impulsive action. Returning to town, James inspected the saloon, where repairs were underway after previous disturbances. Broken chairs, spilled drinks, and damaged tables were being fixed by townsfolk eager to restore normalcy. James spoke with the saloon owner, offering advice on safety protocols and crowd management. Even in moments of rebuilding, vigilance remained essential, and the sheriff's guidance ensured order was maintained. Evening approached, and James conducted a thorough patrol of Redstone. Lanterns glowed softly along the streets, casting long shadows over the wooden sidewalks. Doors were secured, windows checked, and alleys carefully observed. The town appeared peaceful, yet James knew that danger often lurked unseen. His attention to detail and disciplined routine kept Redstone one step ahead of potential threats. During his patrol, James encountered several citizens, each expressing gratitude or seeking guidance. He listened patiently, offering practical advice, reassurance, and sometimes quiet counsel. The sheriff's role extended beyond law enforcement. It encompassed mentorship, mediation, and support. Building trust was a continuous effort, as essential to the town's safety as any revolver or deputy. Later, James convened a meeting with his deputies. They reviewed the day's events, discussed strategies for the coming days, and shared observations. Each deputy contributed insights, while James provided perspective, emphasizing vigilance, strategic thinking, and moral integrity. Leadership was not about domination. It was about coordination, clarity, and shared responsibility. As night fell fully, James made a final circuit through Redstone. The town lay quiet, with only the occasional whisper of wind or the distant cry of an owl breaking the silence. He checked every gate, every key, and every secured building. The rhythm of his patrol was deliberate, reinforcing safety and his own awareness. The Wild West demanded constant attention, and James accepted this responsibility with unwavering resolve. Returning to the office above the jailhouse, he documented the day's events with meticulous care. He recorded incidents, reflections, and lessons learned. Each entry served as both a historical record and a guide for future action. The journal was more than paperwork. It was a testament to diligence, courage, and the ongoing struggle to maintain justice in a dangerous land. Finally, James stepped onto the boardwalk outside his office, gazing at the moonlit town below. Dust drifted lazily through the air, and distant hills shimmered in silver light. Redstone was safe tonight. Families slept without fear. Businesses were intact, and the town's fragile order remained intact. James allowed himself a rare moment of quiet pride, understanding that this peace was both fragile and hard-won. He climbed the stairs to his small room above the jailhouse. Exhaustion weighed heavily, yet he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His duties had tested his courage, patience, and judgment, but he had protected the town he had sworn to serve. The Wild West was relentless, but the resilience of Redstone and the loyalty of its people offered a reward that no danger could diminish. As James lay on his cot, he reflected on the trials of the past days, the duels, the fires, the bandits, and the countless small conflicts. Each challenge had demanded skill, courage, and empathy. Tomorrow would bring new threats, but for tonight, Redstone rested safely under his watch. The sheriff closed his eyes, embracing a fleeting peace before the inevitable demands of another day in the Wild West. James lingered by the edge of town, watching the hills in the distance. Shadows stretched long over the terrain, and the wind carried the faint scent of sagebrush and dust. The Wild West had a rhythm all its own. Quiet moments often preceded storms, and even when the town seemed safe, danger could appear where least expected. James's mind wandered over the days past, replaying decisions, actions, and consequences. He thought of the deputies who had stood by him through fire and gunpowder, whose courage and skill had saved lives repeatedly. He considered each one's strengths and weaknesses, knowing that training, mentorship, and guidance were as vital as ammunition and rifles. A sheriff led not only by orders but by example, and James took this duty seriously. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. Mrs. Harper, the widow who ran the inn, had come to bring him a cup of tea. She smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and concern. "You've done so much for us," she said quietly. James nodded, accepting the cup. "It's not me alone," he replied. "Redstone stands because everyone here plays a part. Community," he reminded himself, was the backbone of survival in these harsh lands. Evening fell fully, and James walked slowly through the streets, stopping occasionally to observe his town. Children peered curiously from windows, elders nodded respectfully, and merchants prepared their shops for the next day. Each interaction reminded him that law enforcement was as much about trust and relationships as about vigilance and courage. Protecting lives required understanding lives. Returning to the jailhouse, he checked on the captured gang members once more. They were quiet, resigned, but James still observed carefully. Even defeated criminals could pose subtle threats. He ensured that the guards were alert, that cells were secure, and that justice was administered fairly. The law demanded consistency, and James's integrity required it as much as the safety of Redstone. Later, he revisited the scene of yesterday's confrontation. The main street bore marks of bullets and broken wood, yet townsfolk had begun rebuilding already. James helped carry a beam to support a damaged storefront, his presence both practical and symbolic. Every repaired window, every secured door was a testament to resilience. Leadership, he understood, was as much about showing effort as giving commands. Night deepened, and the sheriff climbed a small rise overlooking the town. The stars were brilliant, glittering against the dark sky, and the hills stretched endlessly into shadow. He reflected on the life he had chosen. A life of risk, of constant attention, and of unrelenting responsibility. Yet, despite exhaustion and solitude, he found purpose. Protecting Redstone, its people, and its way of life was a mission that gave meaning to each waking moment. James's mind returned to the past weeks, the duels, the fires, the threats, and the victories. Every challenge had taught him something: the importance of patience, the need for careful observation, and the power of community. He had learned to anticipate danger, to measure both action and reaction, and to balance force with wisdom. These lessons would guide him tomorrow, and the day after, as the Wild West never offered rest for those sworn to protect. The sheriff descended back into town, checking on lanterns, gates, and streets. The quiet was profound, broken only by the soft rustle of wind through wooden structures. He walked past families settling in for the night, exchanging nods and quiet words. Gratitude, he realized, was often subtle but deeply felt. Redstone's trust in him was hard-earned, and he carried it as carefully as any weapon. In the office above the jailhouse, James prepared his journal for final entries. He recorded not only events but reflections, lessons learned, moments of doubt, flashes of courage, and acts of loyalty. Each word was deliberate, creating a chronicle of leadership, responsibility, and the ongoing struggle to maintain justice. Writing grounded him, providing clarity amidst the chaos of frontier life. Late into the night, James paused one final time at the window. Moonlight bathed the town in silver, highlighting its resilience and the effort of its people. He envisioned tomorrow: more patrols, more challenges, more decisions requiring judgment and integrity. The Wild West was unforgiving, yet this town, and the community within it, had endured. He felt a quiet pride, tempered with the humility that came from knowing that vigilance could never cease. Finally, he lay on his cot above the jailhouse, the soft creak of wood beneath him and the distant cry of an owl accompanying his thoughts. Exhaustion tugged at his body, yet his mind remained alert, reviewing plans for patrols, contingency strategies, and community outreach. A sheriff's life, James reflected, was a constant balancing act between courage and care, vigilance and empathy. As sleep approached, he allowed himself one final reflection. Redstone was more than buildings and streets. It was the sum of its people, their resilience, and their trust in one another. His role was to protect that trust, to enforce the law fairly, and to lead by example. The day had tested every skill, every instinct, and every moral decision he possessed, yet he had succeeded in preserving both lives and the town's integrity. James drifted into a deep, restorative sleep, aware that tomorrow the Wild West would demand everything again. But for this night, the town rested under the watchful eyes of its sheriff. The frontier was unforgiving, unpredictable, and dangerous. Yet life in Redstone continued, guided by courage, discipline, and unwavering commitment. The sheriff's vigilance, the town's resilience, and the bonds of community had endured, and in this balance lay the hope for another day in the ever-challenging Wild West.